Hey, everybody. It is Wednesday, August 14th, 2024. Today is going to be our broadcast. We were planning on having Chris Seveney do a case study today. Unfortunately, he is not able to make the call today. So we had to scramble and put something together real quick. So we have some information topics we want to talk about. There is uh, Quest and Inspira. There are some things going on with them to where they've actually kind of merged into one now. We can explain what's going on there. And we've seen a lot of chatter on the social media outlets about land contracts and stuff. And so we're going to go through a little light educational kind of slide presentation on land contracts and the specifics of them, comparing them to note and mortgages. And then I actually have a case study prepared for you at the end of that as well. So you'll see Jamie on today as well as Jay. So stay tuned. Gentlemen, it is that time of the month where we get together and get to blow up the internet with just random facts.
I think we're gonna.
There you go. Good seeing everybody.
Yeah.
And in scene.
Yes, sir. There you go.
All right. So, Jamie, Jay, we don't have Chris on the call today, so that means we probably get more time to talk.
Chris is on double secret probation.
That's right.
Yes.
This is the second time he's been on.
This is the second time. Yeah.
Yes.
To his defense, he had appropriate scenarios. So.
He does. He usually does. He wouldn't just skip because he didn't feel like doing it. So
We'll let it slide.
Yeah. So I mentioned that Quest and Inspira are merging. I know, Jay, you probably know a little bit more about this maybe than I do and stuff. But so Quest is a custodian, for those of you that don't know, that holds folks' retirement accounts that allow you to invest in certain things like real estate. You can lend money on it. You can buy notes like the three of us do, and other things like that. And I think they can do, oil and like horses and like Bitcoin. And I even think they can do stock market stuff. I'm not sure on it, but anyways, they sent out a letter to anyone that has an account, and they said, "Hey, look, we're going to be taking your account and moving it to another company." And so that company is called Inspira. And Jay, why don't you talk a little bit about that?
Well, essentially, Quest is roughly has about $20 billion of assets under management, and Inspira is a lot larger. I understand that there were some things that took place concerning Texas banking. We don't know all the details, and quite honestly, we do know who the founder of Quest was and everything. They are good people. So I don't know the whole scenario, but Inspira has 70 billion, and it's an opportunity for them to expand their reach, and they've communicated that. The only thing that I'm aware of, I do not have any Quest accounts.
Okay.
I will say I don't. But just through people who I've communicated with who do, many of the same things are going to be staying in place. They're going to honor the
Fee schedule.
Fee schedule, etc. So, and at least the communication initially is that the key critical people are still staying in the same place. So
it's almost like the company is just changing their name.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah,
so time will tell. It's not one of those things where you need to panic. It's not like they're going off the face of the earth. These types of things happen in this industry.
Yeah,
I hate to say it all the time, but it is just part of what happens in the industry.
We're gonna say, Jamie.
Well, I was gonna say, I guess it was Inspira used to be Millennium Trust.
That is correct.
Okay.
So some people may be familiar with Millennium Trust. I do have a very small portion of the 20 billion at Quest.
Clarify that.
relatively
Wait,
speaking.
5%.
And so, and I can say that, you know, maybe this, whether this is good or bad, I don't know, but I haven't really panicked and haven't read too much about it. I've read like the John Heyer post that we talked
Sure.
about, guys, and he may have had more posts subsequently, but point being that I'm not overly concerned, about my own capital and my own retirement funds that are currently with Quest, and just my 2 cents are that this financial management, the financial industry is a highly regulated space, and I always try to give people the benefit of the doubt, and I assume noble intent and assume that there's not, like, I don't just instantly assume fraud or ill intent, and I think that seems to be what happened here. They got caught up in some regulatory issues, and it made sense to sell to Inspira, but you guys correct me if you think I'm wrong, but I don't. It doesn't seem like some massive, fraud scheme or any major
No.
wrongdoing or anything.
No, not at all.
And
Yeah.
Jay said it best in the beginning. The founder Quincy,
Yeah.
he's a really good guy. He actually won,
Yeah.
as voted on by many peers in the silver finance industry as a lifelong achievement award. That guy, he's
Mhm.
done a lot of good. He's gave back to the community. The Quest, as far as I've seen from my point of view, and I am a Quest account holder of a couple of,
Mhm.
they always treated their people right internally and always
Mhm.
have the lowest fees that they could, and just be
Yeah.
the people out there that they could be. So, and as far as we know, yeah, John Heyer is an attorney that has a tax specialty attached to him. So he is the expert in self-directed IRA type of stuff as it pertains to real estate and tax and stuff. And so is Jeff Watson, another attorney that we know of, and they both have highly mentioned on social media how this is not a bad thing. It's all for the best interest on both sides of the fence. The annoying thing for us as account holders is that if you have titled your assets with the Quest long name that you can do if you choose to title it that way, you just have to make changes to that, whether it's another assignment or you have to do a quick link deed. That is kind of an annoying thing. Unfortunately, things like this,
Sure.
like Jay said, it happens in our industry. It happens with servicers. Sometimes servicers don't service loans anymore, and you have to move them to another account. It's just part of what it is. I do have Quest accounts, just to add on top of what Jamie said, and I don't really have a concern for it because it doesn't really change what I do. Fortunately, I've been using a trust system with our accounts, so I don't really have to change any assets as far as titling, and which is another benefit of having a trust. So I just have to change, the beneficiary designations need to have the specific correct titling to it, and that's just a quick change of paper. So nothing on my part that's causing me to be concerned about it. So I'll just kind of leave it at that, unless you guys want to add else to it.
Thankfully, I'd sold. Personally, I'm in a couple of funds. I don't actually own any whole notes, so I don't have to do any assignments either. So
Okay.
I'm a little lucky there.
Yeah. Okay. Is there anything else going on in the industry that you guys have heard of that we kind of should mention before we go into more land contract type stuff?
Yeah, I don't know if we're going to touch upon this in the land contract space. I can wait on that. That's the CFPB letter that basically has gone out and concerning interpretation and guidance as far as where land contracts fall underneath the CFPB regulations. We can get more into that, but if you want to read the report, and I highly encourage you to, all right, you can Google just CFPB guidance on land contracts, and you'll get
Contract for deed is how they word it. They don't
they
say
were a
land contract.
contract for deed, but it comes up either way because
Okay.
I searched it both ways in Google
And this just came out like a few days ago. Is that correct?
yesterday. Matter of fact,
Yesterday. Okay.
yeah, on the 13th.
Okay.
So if
Okay.
you're originating any land contracts, I'm going to tell you flat out, you need to read this.
Yeah.
There's always been an old school culture, especially in the Midwest. Jay and I live in the Midwest. Jamie is kind of on the coast. Have you lived in the Midwest before, or always on the coast?
No, just very briefly 6 months
Okay.
for the military, but
Okay. Well,
but you've invested in the Midwest,
I have
definitely.
invested
So
in the
it-
Midwest. Yes, for
yeah,
sure.
so Jay and I are used to the good old boys, the folks that were,
Mhm.
before us. That's all they did was land
Land
contracts.
contract.
That's like the
Mhm.
famous word for seller carryback is land contract.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
they didn't know any different. They uh, probably back in many years ago, it was probably easy just to do an eviction or a forfeiture on a land contract. But we'll get into the specifics of what we're talking about as
Yeah.
far as educational later. But some of you on the listening on this or watching this will probably understand what we're talking about. But that's not the case today, right? It's like if you have a land contract, you need to foreclose like a note and mortgage, anyways.
Yeah.
Every borrower has equitable title at some point, pretty much when they make a payment. That's how a judge sees it. So
Yeah. I mean, and just to weigh in on that point, Justin, I definitely think people should read the report for sure. At the end of the day, though, the execution of, enforcing of laws ends up being at the state level, for the most part in this type thing. Certainly origination, I agree with Jay. You definitely want to be, if you're originating contracts for deed, be very much aware of this report. But I think it really comes down to the states, and you're right, it's shifted much more toward I guess borrower/buyer protection versus lender rights. And in my experience, and yeah, we'll get into this later, but in my experience, yeah, you cannot absolutely just kick someone out of evict or do a forfeiture,
yeah,
cancel the land contract, and kick them out. Like even this article seems to indicate is that there part of the article says, at least one article I read says that based on one missed payment, you can kick out the buyer, and it's like no.
No.
I've had to do full judicial foreclosure timelines, whether you want to call it a forfeiture or not, but in most cases. So those benefits of owning a CFD, the benefits have become less and less in my view, and that's
yeah.
why we convert as many as we can, or just don't buy them in the first place. So yeah, I know we're going to get into what they are in more detail in a bit.
So let's just go ahead and get into that
It's a
slide.
segue. There you go,
Yeah.
Justin.
That's a good point. Let me get
It's
some
layup.
fancy video
Layup,
going
baby,
here.
man. That's right there.
Swish. All right. So I have done a couple presentations about this before, so I found some old slides to make this nice and easy for us to go through today. And so one of the things I do is I like to compare a note and mortgage versus a land contract. So by the way, those of you that are listening or watching us right now, feel free to chime in in the message box or the comments box, whether you're on YouTube, Facebook, LinkedIn, or whatever platforms that we're streaming to right now, because we'll see the messages and we can pop up your comment on the screen and talk about it as well. We may not talk about it right when you send it. It may be later on down the road, or it may be towards the end when we have kind of a more of a Q&A breakdown at the end. So anyways, on a note and mortgage, you have two instruments, right, Jay? You got a promissory note and you got a mortgage. And the promissory note just spells out the terms. It's the promise to pay. It isn't recorded with the county. It's just a document that's just signed, the wet signature. The mortgage is what says this is what we're securing that promissory note to. So it's the showing the hard evidence, like here's my collateral. It's 3 buildings. It's one piece of real estate at this address with this legal description. And so that's really what it's saying. And the borrower actually becomes the deeded homeowner in this situation. Just like if you have a primary residence at your house, your first home, you typically are buying a house and you're getting a bank loan from Chase or Bank of America, Wells Fargo, whoever. You're actually on the deed, and the bank is not on the deed. So that's kind of the key distinction. This is a recordable document, the mortgage. You can search any recorder's website in any county of any state, and you can find who is the lien holder on that specific property.
And just to briefly add to that, in some states it's a deed of trust. I know you guys know this, but some people may not. The security instrument may be called a deed of trust, and they are slightly different. Or it could be like in Georgia, it's called a security deed. So there are nuances to that, but most people are very familiar with what a mortgage is. So we use that term broadly.
Correct. Yeah. So in our industry, thank you, Jamie, for saying that, because he's right. There are different naming conventions for it. They essentially do the same thing. They're just securing something against a note. In a deed of trust, there is a power of sale clause that can push the foreclosure to a non-judicial type of foreclosure. We won't really get into that specifics because it's not necessary at this point. Just know that there's a difference between a note and mortgage, and then this thing that we're calling land contracts, also contract for deed. I think that's what the next one is. Yeah. So you'll hear those terms interchangeably, and you guys chime in. So I'll say land contract, contract for deed. Jamie, what are some other ones you've heard
Yeah,
of?
I guess installment contract is one
Mhm.
I've heard before because it's not technically a loan; it's installments,
Yeah.
installment payments. But yeah, land contract and contracts for deed or CFDs are the two most common that I hear.
Yeah.
Jay?
Agreed. Bond for deed could be a possibility too.
Yep. South Carolina, right?
South Carolina or Georgia. I think both of those are that.
So those instruments that we just described, they're essentially just one document as opposed to two, and it encompasses kind of a note and mortgage on one document, if you will. So the land contract or contract for deed, as would be commonly known in this industry, it lays out all the terms. It says what the loan is secured to, and then the note holder, so like me, Jamie, or Jay, the one that is providing the carrying back of the financing, we're actually on the deed, not the borrower. So that's the key distinction here is the lender's on the deed, the borrower is not on the deed, but they do have equitable title. And this contract can be recorded or it does not have to be recorded.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so looking at the visuals of this is what I like to do, especially for people that may still be confused on what's the difference. This will help you. So the seller of a property, say Jay is selling the property to Jamie. He's not really a girl, but there's a girl picture up there. Sorry, Jamie.
You just never know in this day and age.
It's true. Yeah, he just has long blonde hair.
There you go.
Heels.
Which I have neither.
I mean, Jamie can be a girl's name, right?
That's true. That
That's
is
true.
true. Okay, that's fair. That's fair. So on a note and mortgage seller finance deal, when you create a note and mortgage, the deed is transferring from Jay to Jamie, seller to buyer. Come on, clicker. Here we go. And then the mortgage is just held by the bank, who happens to be Jay in the situation. The property is secured by it. So the mortgage is held by Jay and the deed is held by Jamie in the situation. And now that buyer, they own the house and they hold the deed. So now the monthly payments just go to Jay, to the bank, just like they normally would. Okay. That's how it works. That's how you're used to seeing it. Land contract, just a little bit different of a nuance. So you still have a deed and you have the land contract, but now once you secure it with the land contract, the deed never changes hands. It stays with the lender. So now the buyer does own the home, but the lender holds the deed. So in the eyes of the county, they don't see the land contract borrower as the owner of the house because they get confused all the time. And this is why we don't like them. So, but the money still flows to the bank just like normal. So it's just the deed is the main differentiator there. So the deed stays with the lender on a contract for deed, and with a note and mortgage, the deed actually is with the borrower.
And
the deed stays with the seller until the terms of that contract are fulfilled, and then at that point, then the deed transfers.
Yes, thank you. That's correct. What I like about doing deals with note and mortgages is the conveying the ownership between, like, if Jay and Jamie are selling a loan to each other. So let's say Jay is the owner of this note and he wants to sell to Jamie. The conveyance on this is super simple. So pretty much Jamie is giving Jay money, and then Jay assigns the mortgage and note over to Jamie. It's that easy
That's
and
it.
clean.
Yeah, that's it.
It's they call it an allonge, which is the transfer of the promissory note in a assignment of mortgage or assignment of deed of trust, depending on the state that you're in, is the conveyance of that mortgage or deed of trust document. So there's two documents. So
and Jay and I have done that.
We actually have.
It's not just hypothetical.
No, we have done that.
So then what happens with the assignment of mortgage that Jay assigns to Jamie? Well, Jamie has to record it with the county recorder, because if the owner of the house decides to sell the property, Jay would have gotten all the receipts from it, all the benefit, receive the income from it, if it wasn't for Jamie recording his assignment showing he is the new mortgage holder. And that's how the title companies know who to pay off, because they see a chain of assignments, just like a chain of deed.
When that assignment is taking place, what you essentially are doing, you are assigning the rights to be able to collect the debt on the promissory note. That is the collateral that is protecting you, that secures that note, and that gives you the legal right to collect that debt. Excuse me, and that's what the assignment transfers that asset or the security instrument over to the new mortgage holder.
So now when these guys have a land contract and they're selling it between each other, then they're going to have the nuance of the deed to transfer. And this is what can get annoying.
Yes.
So
very much so.
but
much more cumbersome. Very
in
much
simplistic
more
form,
cumbersome.
though, Jamie is giving Jay cash, but then Jay has to assign, if I can get my things to move, he has to assign the land contract and the deed over to Jamie. And we typically do a special warranty deed or a quitclaim deed just to convey the titling over, because we don't really need to get title insurance. Like, we'll check to make sure the title's clean, obviously, but that's typically how the trade happens. Now, the county gets really confused depending on what state you're in. Like in Indiana, we have to disclose a sales disclosure form.
Mhm.
And so we have to send all that stuff in and tell them it's a land contract and,
Yep.
do all this stuff. Some states required a tax
Transfer
amount,
tax. Yeah,
transfer tax to transfer
Yeah.
the deed over. So it can get expensive. I think Kentucky is one that can get expensive, if I remember correctly. And Michigan does have some small fees, just because I've done some recently. I just remember that.
Maryland has an out-of-state investor transfer tax, but yeah. And if you're doing due diligence on a land contract to purchase one, a lot of these have changed hands many, many times. And you also, not to get too far in the weeds here, but sometimes there's actually a note in the land contract paperwork, if you will. And so then there should be allonges with that note. And so it can get real messy if you don't know what you're doing. With doing due diligence on a land contract that's been around for some time. So it's a little, like you said, Justin, it confuses people, and and it's hard to get title insurance. Oftentimes I have seen it, but it's not always easy.
Well, it puts you also in the chain of title now. That's what it does.
Right.
So
Right.
there's more risk with that also.
Yes.
From a
There's more
liability
risk and more
standpoint.
work.
Yes.
Yep,
Yeah.
for sure.
I know that all of you guys do this. We do it as well. If we're interested in a land contract, what we will typically do is require the seller of that land contract to convert it to a note and mortgage. We will help them do that, but we would prefer they change that over, convert that before we buy.
Before you buy it.
Yeah, the note and mortgage or the note and deed of trust is what we typically will do.
And one just quick thing on Justin's point about sometimes the land contract itself was not recorded. This may be obvious, but maybe not. You don't want to go and record an assignment of land contract if that land contract was not recorded, because
exactly.
What are you referring to?
That creates all kinds of sirens and whistles, doesn't it?
Right. It was like Jamie that said that earlier. When these things change hands like 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 times, sometimes by accident, somebody will record one of those 8 assignments. And guess what? You got to go back and record the land contract and every preceding assignment before that. So it just gets annoying, and it's just cumbersome. Like, and you're gonna see, those of you that have survived this long on the show, why we just don't like them for all these reasons. We're gonna get into more reasons right now. So on the land contract documentation, it does say that you can. Some of the things that we do when a land contract defaults, meaning if they get more than 90 days behind, a monetary or a non-monetary default, meaning they don't pay taxes or insurance or whatever language is in there that we say is a default. We can remodify the land contract. You can cancel the land contract. That is as a term, which is also like a forfeiture, which is basically like a fast foreclosure if you're able to. Most judges aren't going to allow that, but it is an option. That's why we put judges prefer foreclosure on there. So it's not like you can just go there and victim say like, I'm sorry, you didn't make your payment last month, Mr. Smith. You got 30 days to vacate. It's not going to work like that.
And Justin, I want to jump in a second here. This is the misinformation that's out there where so many people who create land contracts, they think, okay, the borrower or the buyer, they've not made their payments. I can just evict them, all right, and be gone. And do it again. And
Mhm.
as a result, it has been taken advantage of. It's fraught with predatory language. All right, we see it all the time in land contracts. Those days are done. The judge has wide flexibility. If you get put in front of a judge, so a judge has wide flexibility to make an interpretation of whether you are trying to take advantage of this individual, all right, or whether you're making this so predatory that the chances of them ever performing on this is very slow, or excuse me, are very unlikely. They can throw it all out. They can force you to return all their money. CFPB rules, all right, can force you to pay it back, all the money that they paid plus penalties, and or you could lose the property altogether. It is
Yeah.
strictly at the judge's discretion, and that's an area you just don't want to be in.
hmm Right. Yeah. I had another point, but I'm sure I'll think of it.
Okay, sorry.
We have plenty of slides to go through. So,
Yeah,
all
okay,
right.
sorry.
So on a note and mortgage, we typically like to remodify first. The rest of the guys on my show here are probably in agreement. That's the first thing they want to do. A deed in lieu is something that you may hear. It's really a way, and I actually had one that I was working on here in Virginia that we talked about before the call, where the borrower is willing to walk away from the property and just give it back to us without having to go through foreclosure. That's basically where they just sign an agreement that says, yeah, we understand what we're doing. We're giving it back to the bank, and they're going to forgive the debt. We're not going to be foreclosed on. That's a fast way of getting the property back. Sometimes we call it cash for keys. Foreclosure is the slowest way. So there's three things to do. Some people say there's 25 things to do on a default. It's really
Well,
three things.
It's a spin off of these three.
Yeah,
That's
I
what
don't
it
want to
is.
get into making
Yeah.
it sound
Yeah.
like it's got so many options. You really
Yeah, I
have three
mean,
options.
you're either exiting through the property or through the borrower. But
Yeah.
Exactly.
the one that I know what I was going to say briefly, when we're saying land contract in this context, we're talking about owner occupied
Good point.
properties, because land contracts on land may not be subject to the same, restrictive CFPB guidelines, and you may be able to just quickly do a cancellation of land contract and take that plot of land back.
Yeah.
Plot of land. It depends, but
Yeah.
when you get
Not
into the owner
usually.
occupied space, there are a lot more strings attached.
That's a good point that you brought up, Jamie, because that is a perception out there that most people assume because it's land, it's non-owner occupied, that they don't have to follow any of the CFPB rules, and they are wrong.
Yeah,
They are wrong.
I'll say it depends, but
Well, I say it very seldom depends. It's more if you need to fall in line with this, you need to favor the side of the CFPB,
Sure.
and follow
Absolutely.
that process. Because if for some reason they built a house on there,
right.
you fell under the CFPB rules, even though you thought that they weren't going to build a house on there. So you would
Fair.
have to have them sign an affidavit up front saying they have no intentions of making this a primary residence or a residence at all. So a true non-owner occupied is really a piece of real estate that is being used as an investment property. And so that can fall under non-owner.
Right.
The term land contract also it is a misnomer as far as the name. It's a contract for deed.
Right.
But I know for the Midwest, okay, everyone calls it the slang term of land contract.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So just understand when you hear that, we're not talking a land contract.
Yeah.
We could, but that's just a pseudo name for a contract for deed.
And none of this is legal advice, by the way.
Exactly.
Absolutely. Thank you. Yes, this is not.
This is just off our experience. All of us have bought thousands of loans
from our experience.
Yeah, thousands of loans. We've seen a lot over the years, and this is definitely we're telling you what anybody that's seasoned in the business would tell you.
Right.
So notices that come through on land contract, guess what? You're on the deed, so you're going to get all these annoying notices. You're going to get tax assessments coming to you. You're going to get code violations. You're going to get maybe phone calls if your number is recorded with all this information. You're going to get nuanced letters as well when they don't. They have like a broken down RV that has grass 5 feet tall all around it.
Mattresses coming out of the RV.
Yeah, tires.
Yeah,
that was the last case that you did.
Yeah, exactly.
HOA notices if they're in an HOA or a condo association, you're going to get all that stuff. On note and mortgage, you get nothing because
Yeah,
you're the bank. You
You're the
don't
bank.
own the house. You're not on the deed, right? So that makes sense why you're not getting the notices.
absolutely.
Hopefully, you're seeing the picture of why we don't like land contracts.
Yeah. And to Jay's point about converting them, typically that does add some value as well to
Correct.
the asset. So meaning the paper that we're buying.
Well, that, and you also are putting yourself in a line to where you don't have to deal with it after you buy it. Because what if that borrower doesn't want to do that? No one
Yeah.
says they
Right.
have to do it.
No.
So
No.
it's like
I have a
Jay's
I have a
stipulation is great because he says, "Hey, before I buy this, you just have to get your buyer to
right.
understand what we're doing and convert this. Otherwise, I'm not buying it." So
Yeah,
Jay puts himself
we
in the
have a
driver's
letter
seat.
that we have a letter we use to encourage the buyer. And typically, I will say it's typically in their best interest to do the conversion,
Usually it is.
you
Yes.
know, but they may not want to, and we've certainly been unsuccessful in several
Yeah,
where it's some of these contract for deed buyers, the borrowers, if you will, but really the buyers of the property, um, they may not have a computer, and I'm just,
Yeah.
so it may be difficult to get them to do a conversion. I know I'm off on a tangent here, but
yeah,
and we could talk maybe later. We'll talk a little bit about some of the pros to CFDs because I think there are a couple.
yeah. Well,
Um,
I'll show an example at the end of
Gotcha.
this. I'm actually getting close to it. It's the next slide. So just to recap real quick on the land contract for deed, the lenders on the deeds, it's extremely lower marketability. We're all going to drop a couple points on our offer just because it says contract for deed. We know we're going to get
More than a couple. I would
knowing
say.
notices. You end up foreclosing anyways. Mortgage, the borrower's on the deed, not you. It's higher marketability. It's a lot cleaner. No county notices and the ownership transfer like we showed before. It's just super easy and nobody's notified about it, as far as the county and stuff. It's just a quick little transfer like that. Here's where the scenario where we all are in agreement on when and why we would do a land contract. Let's say we have an investment property, we have a loan from the bank that we got 100K, whatever 6% rate. So we got 20 years left on it. We're paying 716. So we have this property here and we decide we want to resell it on seller financing. And we can do that. And how we do that is we use a wraparound instrument called a land contract. So it's really a second lien, but it's wrapped around. So it's the donut around the green little mortgage that we have there. So let's say we just resell it because we put some value in it by, maybe building onto it or adding a room or just rehabbing it so we can sell it a lot higher, get a down payment. Unpaid balance is 150. The rate's 9%. So now you can see the difference between the two different payments that we owe versus the payments that we're getting. And that can be your delta, your cash flow there. Just like having a rental with a mortgage on it. That tenant payment coming in, whatever's left over, if you have anything left over, is going to be your point at you, Jay. Whatever you have left over on your rental, it's going to be your free cash flow.
but that's a good point though, because Jay's case study from 2 or 3 months ago was a perfect example
Yeah.
of this.
Yeah. So this is where a land contract makes sense. And this is a
Yep.
temporary situation. So say we have this wrap land contract now and I own it and I'm selling it to Jamie. Jamie's going to say, Justin, I'm going to buy that. But guess what? I'm going to make sure that I pay off that underlying lien when I buy this because I just want one true mortgage. I don't want to have to pay a debt service to anybody else. So that's what Jamie's stipulation is going to be to me. And so that's why when you sell that thing, you can sell it, pay off the underlying lien, and we can also convert that land contract to a note mortgage. I've seen some cool language in some of these land contracts before, like this in these wraps that says the lender has the right to convert this to a note and mortgage after so many months or so many years, or in the event this underlying lien gets paid off. So you can make it pretty strong like that.
I don't know if we're gonna. So one pro tip: if you do these conversions, if you convert from a contract for deed to a note and mortgage, and this is from experience, I would recommend at least running a title, some type of O&E
Yes.
report when you do that.
Absolutely.
Yes.
And I'll give you a really quick true case study. Is we did that. We did actually run a title search when we did the conversion. This was in Michigan. However, this lien didn't actually come up on it. So we tried to do the right thing. But the we converted from a CFD to a note and mortgage. There were two borrowers or buyers, and the property was owned tenants in common, and so they were not joint tenants or tenants by the entirety. Tenants in common. One of the boyfriend who had left, he had some debt that got slapped onto the property that did not come up on our title search. I go and I convert this CFD to a note and mortgage. We record the mortgage. That's actually ahead of that lien that I just referred to is ahead of ours. I went to sell that note and mortgage, and it came up on the buyer's title search of the note and mortgage. And so he didn't purchase the note and mortgage, and I still own it, and they've been paying ever since, and it's fine. But and I think next year it's supposed to fall off. It was unsecured debt that turned into secured debt. So that's in the weeds quite a bit, but I highly recommend you do a title search when you're doing this conversion, because you are deeding that property over, and you're holding also that mortgage, and you want to make sure your first lien is actually a first lien.
Right.
You
I
can always
would say
get
also,
title insurance and lender's title policy in those situations if you wanted to really
Yeah.
button it up, but most of the time it's not
It's
necessary.
right.
Jay.
I'm going to just jump from the standpoint. If you do, I'm going to jump back to when you were talking about the deed in lieu. It's important also that you do a title search before you do that deed in lieu in
True.
case anything has attached to that property.
Yep.
Absolutely. Okay, since we're on the topic of Michigan, the case study that I found was from Michigan because I think we just got paid off in the summer, so it was fresh in my mind. So
Always a good thing.
so we
love payoffs.
We have this loan in Lansing, Michigan. We bought it in one of our trust accounts, and we bought this back in 2020. So I'll go through some of the numbers, but the picture doesn't do it justice. It actually looks like a decent house. I think it's more granulated, and so it looks a little rough in the photo that I kind of zoomed in on here. But when we bought it back in 2020, it was valued around $30,000. This isn't uncommon for the area that it was in. I think it was more downtownish of Lansing, so you see a lot of smaller houses like that. We purchased it as a performing loan in 2020. Wasn't very much money. But the gist of what's going to happen here is we had to foreclose on it. There was an eviction process, and then we sold it for cash. Okay, so that's the punchline. But we're going to kind of walk through the whole thing now. So it had a $26K balance on it. The rate was decent back then, 875. The P&I is pretty low because it was a very long term. It was like a almost 30-year mortgage when it was originated. So it had quite a bit of seasoning to it. Probably I don't know, 7-8 years to it, which is why we bought it. It was recently converted to a note and mortgage before we bought it, which was an added bonus. So we liked that even better. We purchased it for around $21,000. So we got a decent discount on there. The monthly cash flow isn't that high, but versus what we're paying for it, it's not that bad. The borrower was able to make about 26 payments, and then they defaulted. So before it defaulted, it had like pretty much a flawless pay history. So these things unfortunately happen, even though we all sit there and say we love a long pay history. It's definitely a determiner of what future events are probably going to be like. But sometimes future events are just kind of unknown, and for whatever reason, they just default. So
life circumstances happen.
Yeah, the
They
borrower
change.
never really gave us any issues. Was never really a person that was late. They just were making early payments, which was even more of a sign that we like this. And I believe they even made a super large payment. They made like I want to say like a $2,000 or $3,000 payment in 1 year, and so that way they didn't have to make payments for a long time. And so they did that as well in this 26-month span here. So that's why I said they just made 26 payments. So I did start the foreclosure. So they had a paid date. So they were paid up to September 15th of 2022. So however long it took me to start foreclosure, let's just say 4 months later is when I actually started the foreclosure. But the borrower kept doing maintenance to the property, and I think they were confused as to what's going on. It was an older gentleman. I believe the wife passed away, I want to say, within a few years of us buying this anyway. So he was older, living, assumed to by himself. And So when the servicer had reached out to them and was explaining, hey, you're going through foreclosure, you need to get this loan caught up. And they were explaining to them that, well, we're putting in new windows at the house. And we actually have pictures of it. I don't think I pasted it in this thing, but they were putting in new windows and trying to do some repairs. And they were like, hey, the servicer's trying to say, hey, don't do that. If you're going through foreclosure and you lose this house, you're just basically wasting your money. You need to use that to pay down the mortgage so you keep your house. And so the gentleman, I think, was just really confused. So it did go to the sale in Michigan, and it did not get picked up, and so it got back to me as an REO, real estate owned property. The borrower didn't have anywhere to go, and basically was just staying in the house because they didn't think that they had to leave. So it wasn't they weren't being resisted. They just he's there. So what can you do?
You have an incumbent squatter.
Yeah. Say it lightly.
Yeah.
So what do you do in these situations? Well,
You ask them to put in new windows. No, I'm just
ask him
kidding.
ask him to do more rehab work, and then
Yeah,
say, "Hey, leave."
exactly.
Here's your 24 pack of White Castle. You know,
There.
eviction now has to come into play. So the squatter now they're a squatter. They have rights and they have personal belongings there, and so I can't just have them leave. I have to go through an eviction process, and so that was the next step. So the foreclosure probably took, I don't know, Jay, let's just say it took 4 months to file it, and then probably another 4 months from that point to actually get the foreclosure to finalize. So that was probably 8 months right there. The eviction typically wouldn't take very long. Usually, I would say 30 to 60 days is pretty common for an eviction.
Yeah.
However, in the state of Michigan, there is a 6-month right of redemption period. And so you have to wait 6 months before you can actually file for the eviction and start that process. So it gives the person a chance to try to get caught back up. So then there was 4 months went by to start the foreclosure, another 4 months to get through the foreclosure. Now there's a 6-month time lag to where they get the right of redemption. So that's what's 8 and 6. That's 14 months right there.
And you're really stuck. You can't do anything at that point.
Do anything about it. Can't do anything about it. So yeah, Michigan is a fast foreclosure state, but if they're in that property, it's not a fast foreclosure at all. So the cost that I'm racking up here is about $5,000. So it's not that expensive. If you think this is expensive, this is not expensive for a foreclosure / eviction. So I was paying for forced placed insurance on the property. I was paying for eventually we'll get to the point where the sheriff got them and the belongings out, and I was paying for my attorney's fees to go through the foreclosure and the eviction process. So it was just a very low cost to do this. So typically would probably be like in the 8 to 10,000 range on something like this would be kind of common. So this is kind of a low cost. So I was kind of lucky there. When we finally got through the eviction, the borrower, the judge had signed the writ and the writ was issued. However, the borrower, the squatter there was still confused. They actually had to get a guardian ad litem, a GAL, to come because I think the borrower was close to death. And I think the borrower also started to have a mental breakdown to where they just couldn't live on their own anymore. They couldn't make proper decisions. And this is why they were confused. How I was saying earlier, they were just confused. They didn't understand what was going on. They were just like, I don't have to leave. And they didn't realize that they weren't paying. Like it was just a whole process. So the judge, before we could actually have the sheriff order them out, they, continued it for a month. Then the guardian ad litem and the borrower showed up in court again, and the judge allowed him to continue another month because he didn't have anywhere to go. So eventually it got to like 2 or 3 continuances. And I said, look, I'm a nice person, but I've been in this for 2 years now, and I don't have the property back. Like I need this property back. Yeah. And so finally the judge ordered the sheriff to get his things out. The guy was nice, but they moved all of his belongings out onto the driveway. And then they said, Mr. or whatever the person's name was, you have 24 hours to get your stuff off the lawn or we have to throw it away. So that's what I gave them was 24 hours. So the person didn't even come by and get their stuff. They just left it all there. So like, their dresser, their
all their personal
couch,
belongings and everything.
television, like all that stuff just sitting there in their driveway, just waiting for someone to, pick it up and go with it, or just people that down the street that would just take it and steal it. But yeah, all the stuff end up being left there. So we just had to take dumpsters and bring them over there, load them, and get the stuff out of there. So all that being said, it was only $5,000, which I still couldn't believe. I had to go back through my invoices today just to make sure. But
What'd you do with that stuff? Was it worth $5,000?
I don't think it was
doubt it.
worth that much. It was, a very old.
If it was still there, in 24
there, yeah.
hours, it wasn't
No,
worth very much.
Okay, Jay, that's a good point. That's a
Exactly.
solid point. So I end up selling the property for $49,000.
Oh wow!
So after real estate fees, after paying delinquent taxes and whatever else, I paid all the closing costs just to get rid of this thing.
Sure.
It ended up being $41,600 was net in our pocket after the $49,000 sale. So it took about almost 2 years to go through that foreclosure and eviction process. And so I was able to collect about $5,800 in payments before this happened. And then plus I had a $41,600 net sale. So if you take out the $20,900 that I actually put into this property, my true profit above what I invested was $21,500. So I doubled my money in 4 years. And 2 of those years were non-cash flowing years. Going through
Nice.
all that pain, all that annoyance, I still end up making a lot more money than I would have if this was just a cash flowing investment.
And when was this that you sold it? Approximately.
Over the summer is when we got it
Gotcha.
back and we got it sold. So if this borrower would have stayed in there and paid like normal, I only would have had $10,800 in payments because the payments are so small, $225 a month. So this turned out way better as far as the books are concerned, on profit, but it was obviously a lot of work, a lot of headache, and a lot of concern over that. But on this low value of an investment, low value property, I couldn't believe that we were able to double our money like that. It's pretty amazing.
Especially
Well,
if you
it's sad.
probably
Go ahead.
sorry.
Sorry. No,
Oh,
go ahead, Jim.
just real quickly, you probably on the foreclosure auction, I presume you provided bidding instructions, and nobody you got the property back for less than you ended up selling it for on the open market, right? So you're going into listing the property thinking it's worth less than whatever your max bid was. So yeah, I don't know if you put any work into it, but
so that's a good point because it didn't sell at the steps.
yeah.
Why wouldn't it sell at the steps? It was only the judgment was only for like $30,000 or $31,000.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you had a good agent,
somebody paid $49,000 for it, and it was the same condition. Just
right.
Probably a year later. It probably took a year to go through the eviction after the delays, and then the attorneys screwed up because they didn't get the paperwork going because someone was on vacation. Like it cost me 30 days just from the attorney's side, and then all the continuances, that was at least 90 to 120 days of continuances, plus going through the actual eviction process from those 60 days. That's why it took a year to go through the eviction. And trust me, the court system timeline is not in your favor once it gets to that point.
They don't care how long you've owned it.
The good news is I did double my money.
Yeah.
Foreclosure eviction took way too long.
And the thing on this, Justin, all right, is you've made out, you did very well, but from the gentleman's standpoint, this could all have been avoided if there was a family member that would have recognized the signs of dementia or Alzheimer's, the stuff that you're talking about here. There was clearly a mental defect, a mental issue that was taking place in his life. And they could have sold the property and put him and used that money to put him into some type of facility that would have taken care of him.
Yeah. And we had the attorneys ask the guardian ad litem, like, is there any family members or friends around the guardian? I think they went through 2 guardian ad litems with the gentleman. Not sure why. I'm just assuming he was just there by himself. His wife passed away a few years ago, and maybe there's no
Maybe
kids
no
that they had.
children. Maybe no children. It's very
Yeah.
true.
So it's unfortunate. I mean, what can you do? I mean, you feel for the guy, but at the same time, it's like I have this investment, and
You have to
we gotta
make
be
the
able to do
tough
something with it.
decisions at times.
And
You
he's had,
do.
I mean, he had 22 months of living there for free.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
that's
Yeah.
everyone. The sheriff and everybody said, "Look, you need to find your friend. Here's a U-Haul. Get a U-Haul truck. Call your friend, your neighbor, or whoever. Like, have somebody help you." Like, everyone was trying to add value to this guy to help him out and be like, "We don't want you to lose your stuff. Like,
Right.
please take your stuff with you because it's your stuff. Don't lose everything in your life." But it's just, you can't solve everybody's problems. So
No, and the point is, if you're going to be in this business, there's going to be a point in your career where you're going to have to make the tough decisions.
yeah,
Okay, you have to you have to step your emotional side, and you have to look at it from a business aspect. All right, Justin,
Yep.
you went way and beyond the call. I'll say the call here to trying to help this gentleman. All right, out, but there just comes a point where you there has to be a decision made, and sometimes for inexperience or the first time that you deal with this, it's difficult to do. But you have to learn to set those emotions off to the
yeah.
side.
For sure.
I was hoping that we could re-owner finance this property because I didn't want the cash back. I just wanted to get another down payment and keep rolling with it.
Sure.
But nobody took our owner financing offer, even with the language that we typically do, private financing with large down payment. We got a cash offer. I was actually surprised we got one that
Like I
high.
say.
So that's what we did. Yeah, like I said, the borrower did have a friend to stay with, which was good. He didn't, roam in the streets. I wish I would have had a chance to talk to the guardian ad litem because I feel like they didn't do the right things for this person. I don't think they tried as hard as they could have. Just from the conversations with the attorney that I had. Again, this is one side of the story, not the second side of the story.
Sure.
But that's my case study. That's what happened with it. Glad we got it back. We already put that money to use with another asset. So that's another unique thing.
Yeah.
Connect with us if you need to sell first liens, and contract for deed, note, mortgage, note, deed, trust, lease options, things like that. We actually buy hard money loans as well.
Mhm.
So check us out. Any one of us can buy it. The next time we're gonna meet is 9/11.
Yeah, there you go.
9/11.
Before we close shop, I'd like to just touch base on some fallacies that's out there that I'll say misinterpretations that some, I'll say, landlords or people who are originating land contracts, all right, that they assume some things. One of that is that although the law, all right, I'll say there's a ton of case law history that supports land contracts. I'm going to state specifically in Indiana here, okay, because that's where, and Justin, you obviously can jump in on that. But the tide is turning, all right, and the tide is turning from the standpoint that it used to be, you could evict up until 20% of equity,
Yep.
okay, and pay 20% down on whatever the purchase price is. But the courts are in a situation now, and you might get a conservative judge, you might not, you might get a very liberal judge. It all depends on the judge that you get. But that is eroding, is what is essentially happening. Okay, equitable interest. If you're going, there's two things you have to be aware of. If you have a land contract from a few years back, all right, and all due to all the appreciation that has taken place in the market, that appreciation is not yours as the seller. The judge, the courts will interpret that as the equity for the buyer. Okay, so in most of these situations, maybe they've only paid $5,000, $10,000 down, but the appreciation that's already taken place in the market, they're well past equitable interest, and you're
Yep.
going to have to foreclose, right? Whether they've paid down 20% or not. All right, so you need to be aware of that. Number one. Number two is the fact that my attorney that we use routinely, he has informed me that there is now case law at the Indiana State Supreme Court that has established 5% equity interest is equitable interest. Okay, so now the case law supports a much lower than it's been eroding. All right.
And just to clarify, you're saying you with under that 5%, you could theoretically still do a forfeiture.
You
right?
can still do a forfeiture.
Okay.
A down payment pretty much wipes that out.
It pretty much if you're doing
Sure.
an appropriate an appropriate down payment, it's going to wipe that out. Okay. So you're already into a situation where you're going to have to foreclose. All right. And again, if the judge is based upon the terminology and the language that you have in the note, and Justin, we've all three have seen stuff that are in land contracts that are even illegal from a rental law standpoint, let alone from a note and mortgage standpoint, or as far as mortgage law is concerned.
Yeah.
All right. You need to educate yourself. All right. We establish when we do a land contract, we primarily will do note and mortgages. We rarely will buy a land contract. There are certain situations where we will originate a note and mortgage, and one of those is essentially what Justin covered earlier. But we establish in the contract what that equitable interest is, so everyone knows up front. All right, where that's at, and it's not. We typically do 15%. That's what we essentially establish at 15. When you've paid 15% down, all right, on the purchase price, you have equitable interest. Now, saying that, we typically get 15% or more as our down payments, so it's a moot point. Okay. The other thing is that so many of these land contracts are not recorded. Okay. Well, I understand what you're trying to accomplish there, but the bottom line is if an individual that is buying understands the law or gets it in front of an attorney, it doesn't matter whether it's recorded or not. You're going to get skewered. Okay. All right. It's not worth the risks. Okay. The land contract, I know guys that this was their whole business model. They get a down payment. They know that they're not going to perform. All right. These are people who are not going to perform. And their whole business model is that, we get the down payment, they make a few payments, we evict and we redo it again.
That's just bad business.
It's terrible. It's just bad business. Okay.
Yeah.
CFPB ruling is absolutely very clear that land contracts, lease options, all right, are also underneath the rules of CFPB, and therefore you need to look at, can this bar or make a reasonable effort to determine from Dodd-Frank rules that they have the ability to repay. How that's being enforced, okay.
Right.
I'm not going to get into the argument. I'm not going to be the poster child. And I don't think we want, and I don't want to be anybody. They have nailed people. Okay. Yeah. I don't know anybody locally. Okay. That's not the point. If there's enough complaints that come in, I can assure you they're going to come after you. All right. So it's complaint driven. Do it the right way and create a note and a mortgage or create a land contract that's going to perform well for the long term and has value. Yeah. That's the whole goal of what you're trying to do.
Right. And I think for the most part across the industry, most investors are good people, and not trying to take advantage of people. But a few bad apples ruin it for everyone else. And
very true.
Then you have more and more government regulation. That's
there's some states where lease options you cannot do. There's some states where you cannot do contract for deeds.
Yeah. Maryland,
because of this.
Maryland's one.
Yeah.
You're not supposed to.
Yeah. So,
all right, guys, great conversations today. Let's just wrap this up with using RMLO, underwrite your borrowers.
Yes.
Go through a title company that has an attorney on staff that can generate the note and mortgage documents for you, so you have it properly done. Get the proper title and lender's title insurances, That's how you do things the right way. So contact any one of us, and we can definitely help you with that.
Yep.
So this is the end of the show. We appreciate that. Any comments you want to make after for the replays, we'll be glad to chime in. So thanks for watching. We look forward to seeing you on 9/11. And thank you guys for all the extra information that you brought to the show today. Really appreciate it. And I guess everyone have a happy school year. For those of you who have kids, this is my kids' first week in school, so I'm kind of happy for that, but also kind of sad that they're getting older as well.
I'm past that stage.
All right, y'all. Have a good night. See you, everybody.
All right. We'll see you.
Take care.
Bye-bye.